Hello everyone, my name is Mohammadreza Ashouri, and in this presentation video I'm going to talk about my research paper, an extensive security analysis on Ethereum smart contracts. So, alright, so before we plunge into the details of the paper and this research, I would like to introduce you some basic concepts regarding Ethereum and smart contracts for those of you who are not too much familiar with this area. So essentially, Ethereum is a decentralized blockchain platform that establishes a peer-to-peer network that securely executes and verifies application code. So this application code are basically called smart contracts. So smart contracts allow participants of a blockchain network to transact with each other without a trusted centralized authority. So we are trying to actually break it down with explaining its main components. So regarding or the question might be, what are the key components of the Ethereum blockchain? So key components constitutes clients here, transaction pool, miners, mining pool, Ethereum virtual machine. So the first Ethereum block is called basically Genesis block, which means the first block in blockchain. And regarding node or client, node is a device or a piece of code that communicates with the Ethereum network. And nodes are also known as clients. So these are just interchangeable, terms. And there are actually a couple of softwares that can function as an Ethereum node, such as Parity, Go Ethereum, which is a Ethereum virtual machine written in Go language, and there are so many out there. So what is a block? Block is a package of data that has 0 or more transaction and also contains the hash of the previous block and some metadata, etc. Then the other important concept here is miner. So what is a miner? Miner basically adds the block to the blockchain. That's the main functionality of miner. And miners are simply like nodes in a blockchain network who find basically new block, confirm transaction, and commit new transaction in a block. So that's how get rewarded by mining. So then the other concept is proof of work. So proof of work is an activity that miners undertake to write transaction to a new block. So the next important component here in the Ethereum blockchain is called Ethereum virtual machine, or the EVM. So decentralized, which is basically a centralized computing platform or decentralized computing platform, which forms the core of the Ethereum platform. So that's similar to Java virtual machine. We have an alternative machine. This is called Ethereum virtual machine. So, and the final concept is a smart contract. So a smart contract is basically a persistent piece of code. I can actually here explain that. So essentially, a smart contract is a persistent piece of code on the Ethereum blockchain or any other blockchain that basically supports a smart contract. And it has basically a set of data and an executable function. So it comprises data and functions. And these functions basically execute when Ethereum or EVM transactions get triggered with a certain input parameters. So this is how they basically get executed. So based on the input parameters, the function will execute and interact with data within or outside of the contract. So we have also the other concepts here, like such as gas limits and mining pool, etc. So you can actually find more information in the paper about that. Regarding a smart contract, because this is the main basically concept of this paper, and we are going to introduce how we perform security analysis on them. Smart contracts, we can see them, we can basically perceive them as simple programs stored on a blockchain, all right, that run when predetermined conditions are made. So it works based on the conditions, and they typically are used to automate the execution of an agreement so that all participants in a network can be immediately immediately be certain of the outcome. So everybody knows what's going on without any mediary, basically any proxy involvement or time loss. So they can also automate a workflow, triggering the next action when conditions are met. So in this basically research paper, we focused on the security aspect of smart contract. So before we plunge into the security aspects, let's talk about some of the benefits of a smart contract. So according to IBM, smart contracts have various benefits, such as speed, efficiency, and accuracy. So once a condition is met, the contract is executed immediately. Because smart contracts are digital and automated, there is no paperwork to process and no time spent reconciling errors that often result from manual filling in documents. So we have trust and transparency. What does it mean? Because there is no any third party involved, there is no any proxies, and because encrypted records of transaction are shared across participants, there is no need to question whether information has been altered for personal benefits, because everything is transparent and there is a concept of agreement, a decentralized agreement. And lastly, security. So blockchain transaction records are encrypted, which makes them very hard to hack. It's not impossible to hack, but it's actually quite significant and it's very challenging. Moreover, because each record is connected to the previous one and the subsequent record on the distributed ledger, hackers would have to alter the entire change of a blockchain to change basically a single record, which in large enough networks such as Bitcoin or Ethereum seems to be impossible. However, the last point is not very accurate, and that's why we have this basically research. Even though there is a basically general perception regarding the security of blockchain technology, particularly in Ethereum, and the people think that's very secure but this is not actually all the fact. So as you can see in this table, there are multiple well-known security issues, vulnerabilities reported in Ethereum smart contracts ecosystem that all have been comprehensively described in various references that you can also find in my paper. We have actually a lot of vulnerability and security issues in different layers, such as Solidity code. Solidity is the main language similar to JavaScript for developing smart contracts for the Ethereum virtual machine. And then in the blockchain itself, in the architecture of that, logical issues related to oracles, and even issues inside of the EVM and virtual machine. So for instance, one of the legendary vulnerabilities of cyber attacks is called reentrancy, and the cyber attack actually was called DAO. So on June 17, 2016, the DAO smart contracts, which is one of the most, or it was one of the most reputable smart contracts at the time on the Ethereum network, was subjected to a cyber attack that was exploiting a combination of smart contract vulnerabilities, including one of the concerning recursive calls. So that's reentrancy attack actually is associated to recursive calls, and that result in the transfer or illegal transfer of 3.6 million Ether token, valued at the time around $50 million, and at the time that I'm recording this presentation, it's about more than $10 billion. So that actually shows you the scale of attack and the power of attacks and the sensitivity of the environment. So in order to address these issues, we provide a solution. Our solution is called ETH-FAS or Ethereum FAS, and this is a framework for vulnerability analysis and automatic exploit generation for the EVM or Ethereum virtual machine. So our solution is responsible to find, analyze, and generate exploit for a wide range of security issues in Ethereum ecosystem. So we designed a framework, and we basically combine various techniques such as call graph analysis, dynamic execution, and symbolic testing in order to identify exploitable path in a given smart contracts and generate potential triggering inputs, i.e. exploit for them. So here I'm going to break it down and explain you each stage with more details. So the first stage, as you can see here, ETH FOSS comprises three main stages. The first stage is code property graph analysis. So in this stage, we perform a call graph analysis, and we basically look for low-level EVM instructions in a given smart contracts that might be the subject of any potential cyber attack. So here in this table, as you can see on the screen, you see some of the EVM instructions, and these instructions are more involved in potential hacks, and hackers and cyber attackers are very interested in these sort of basic instructions to manipulate the contract and perform various attacks. The second, for further information about the instructions, please take a look at the paper and its references. And after this, we basically perform backward slicing in order to find associated source of inputs that triggers these, critical methods inside of a given binary. And then we combine basically dynamic execution and symbolic execution or symbolic testing to make sure those, about the lack of sanitization and security issues in executable paths in a given smart contracts, and report that to the end user. So in order to interpret and identify potential exploitable paths within the bytecode of a smart contract, we generate a graph model of the target smart contracts in the first step. So our graph model is based on code property graphs, or CPGSs. So this is an extensible and language agnostic representation of program code designed for incremental and distributed code analysis. So it's not just limited to EVM or a smart contract. This is a general concept. And these CPGS are constructed based on the EVM bytecode in order to help us to distinguish critical instructions and the relevant executable paths. And note that a critical instruction in a generated CPGS or CPG can be managed to find data dependency paths between the variables in the code. So after finding this path, we later execute them symbolically in order to produce the corresponding inputs, or in our term, basically exploits. And the next stage, we perform dynamic execution. So in real world smart contracts and commercial smart contracts, using off-the-shelf libraries for safety enhancements is quite common. So nowadays, many developers use Open Zeppelin Safe Mat. Is one of the basically popular libraries in the smart contracts in Solidity for protecting smart contracts code against integer overflow or underflow attacks. So in our approach, we also consider to identify and label the presence of this protection in our analysis. Why? Because we want to reduce potential false positive reports. Because if a path is secure, and is basically properly sanitized, we don't want to report that to the end users because it's gonna be false positive. It's not helpful. So to do so, we leveraged a dynamic execution engine to assess the executable target path within actual runtime data. So we collect runtime data, and then we basically evaluate potential executable paths. So in dynamic execution model, a specific input or operation results and a symbolic variable with the specific name, here we call this tail label, is added to the exploitable path. And this symbolic variable is initially set by 0, and then it will be defined, and it is also defined as taint PC, and PC here stands for program counter. Alright, and after identifying exploitable paths, ETH FOSS begins to generate concrete input for the labeled path. To avoid path explosion issue, which is very common in symbolic engines, we perform this stage with the help of the collected actual and runtime data during the dynamic execution. So our symbolic engine basically did not trap during our analysis in infinitive loops and invisible paths, which are basically most critical issues with symbolic execution in software testing. The exploit generation system operates based on the Z3 SMT solver. And consequently, we model the exploitable basically path as a logical formula. So, and when we build that one, we send it to Z3 SMT solver, and the solver is responsible for executing the executable path symbolically and collect a set of path constraints to deliver the values, and we call these values actually payloads for our exploit. So in the Z3 engine, the outcome of this modeling is actual practical exploits to trigger vulnerabilities or zero-day vulnerabilities, any issues inside of target EVM bytecode or inside of basically a smart contracts binary. So regarding our evaluation, here you can see our result. We analyzed 1 million available smart contract on the Ethereum main blockchain. We collected these smart contracts from the beginning of October 2019 until the end of December 2019 with the help of a tool, free open source tool, which is called Etherscan. And here you can see basically more details about our benchmark set in terms of average number of line of code, in terms of basically ETH moving, in terms of the origin interactions, and so on and so forth. So number of libraries inside, number of contracts, etc. So you can also take a look at the paper for further details. So regarding our analysis environment, we made the experiments on a 8-core Xeon W3.2 gigahertz machine with 32 gigabyte RAM running on Ubuntu Linux. And in order to avoid any potential deadlock, we dedicated only 5 minutes as the maximum analysis time. And how we basically yield this number, basically it was based on experiments, multiple configuration of ETH files on 1,000 arbitrary contracts to reach the maximum path coverage. So we found this is how basically we came across with 5 minutes. And our analysis actually took about 60 days or 2 months, and as a result we could identify more than 26,000 vulnerabilities, and we could generate exploit for them. So in this table here you can see some of the well-known but vulnerable smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain, the live blockchain. And of course, for further details about vulnerabilities, you can take a look at the paper. So here you can see basically our framework, basically the rate of false positive results in our analysis, which is around 1.7%, which is very low in comparing with other tools. And this is due to the usage of actual runtime data provided by the dynamic execution module. So we deal with actual real data instead of having approximation, guesstimation. Therefore, we have a more true positive, and the rate of false positive here is actually quite low. So, in terms of comparison with related work, security analysis for the smart contracts ecosystem is continuously gaining attention of researchers, especially cybersecurity analysis. So in this respect, Oyente is one of the pioneers in performing vulnerability detection that in this tool basically leverages symbolic execution testing for identifying bugs in the Ethereum smart contracts. Similarly, Zeus works based on a formal verification method to build and verify the correctness of security policies in a given smart contract. We do have other tools such as Sgram and Regard. Both take smart contracts in Solidity source code. They work based on source code and report potential security issues based on the static predefined patterns. We also have Securify, another very reputable tool. that basically is a static analyzer, and it takes both source code and the EVM bytecode for performing security analysis, so it doesn't support any dynamic execution. And although our work was initially inspired by the tools mentioned before, our approach has multiple advantages over previous tools. So this table here, in a nutshell, represents the result of our comparison analysis with well-known tools in this ecosystem. All right, so here also this table illustrate our comparison in terms of the capability of tools in recognizing a wide range of security vulnerabilities. So as you can see, some of the tools are actually limited to just a few bugs only. However, ETH-FAS actually supports a wide range of bugs in blockchain layer, in the EVM layer, and in Solidity source code layer. So regarding challenges and future work, since a smart contract code is expected to be immutable after development and pushing to the mainnet, and contract owners are anonymous, like people who have Ethereum, Bitcoin, and other tokens, responsible disclosure is usually infeasible. Hence, dealing with vulnerable contracts seems to be quite challenging, and there appears to be no way of addressing the errors detected in already deployed contracts on the network, so we can actually change the code and update that. Therefore, the contract owners can only deprecate the vulnerable contract, move all the funds out of the system, use a new contracts, and move the funds to the new contracts, which is actually cumbersome. It's not feasible in many cases, since other contracts might reference the address of the vulnerable contract, because this ecosystem contracts actually communicate with each other. It can really hurt the vulnerable application and the whole ecosystem. However, it seems that designing a runtime shield module in ETH scan in the future can help not to protect vulnerable contracts against various runtime attacks, but also provide a layer of protection for general smart contracts in order to detect and report potential cyber attacks. So in a nutshell, this presentation today introduced ETH-FAS as a practical and portable security analysis and automatic exploit generation framework for smart contracts ecosystem. Our approach takes into consideration the complexity of analyzing real-world commercial smart contracts where the source code is not available and effectively address them. The novelty of paper is to use basically an efficient analysis system that identifies zero-day bugs, unseen attacks, and generates reliable exploits for identified bugs without human interaction by combining a hybrid approach based on static call graph analysis, dynamic execution, and symbolic testing in order to gain accurate result with maximum coverage. Thank you very much for your attention. Please read the paper or contact me by this email.